You know, they say cinema is like a mirror for a nation's soul. It reflects its biggest hopes, its deepest fears, and how it sees itself. Well, today, we're looking at the story of Bangladesh's 1971 Liberation War, but we're seeing it through two totally different films made 40 years apart. And what they show us? Well, it reveals a country's changing heart. This quote from a filmmaker, man, it just says it all. In Bangladesh, if you're making a film about the 1971 war, you're not just making art. No, it's a high-stakes political act. You're walking through a minefield of censorship, politics, and national memory. Every single choice you make is going to be picked apart. And that really brings us to the big question we're digging into today. How is it possible that a film from 1972, made in the raw, immediate aftermath of a brutal war, tells a completely different story than one from 2011, made in a much more globalized and, you could say, contentious time? It's a puzzle that shows us a nation's origin story is never really set in stone. Okay, first things first, there's a key term you really need to know: Mukti Judho. This isn't just the Bengali War for the 1971 war. For Bangladesh, this is the foundational event. It's their Big Bang. So every film we talk about today is a Mukti Judho film, and each one is trying to capture the very soul of the nation. So this timeline really sets the stage for us. After the 1947 partition of India, you get this strange country in two parts, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, with 1,000 miles of India in between. In 1971, that arrangement shatters in a violent war. And just months later, bam, the first major war film, Ore Agaro Jan, hits theaters. Then we jump 4 decades to 2011 and a film that sparked an absolute firestorm, Maharjan. So let's go back. How was this story first told on screen? We're in 1972. The country is brand new. The wounds are still bleeding, and the film industry is just trying to make sense of everything that just happened. Ora Igaro John wasn't some polished historical drama made with years of reflection. This was an immediate gut punch of a response. You should think of it less as a movie and more like a cultural scream. It was a way for a traumatized nation to process its pain and, at the same time, celebrate this victory it had fought so hard for. And get this, the way they made it was just staggering. This wasn't just acting. They cast actual veterans, people who had just been fighting. The new National Army, wanting to help out, gave them live ammunition for the battle scenes. I mean, can you imagine? The producer even said everybody had weapons in their hands at that point. They even found a bridge that was already destroyed in the war and blew it up again for the camera. This was reality just bleeding right onto the screen. All right, now let's hit fast forward. We're jumping 4 whole decades. The year is 2011. Bangladesh is a totally different place. It's way more connected to the rest of the world, and there's a whole new generation that was born long after the war. And then this new film comes along, and it challenges everything the first one stood for. Maharjan was the polar opposite of that first film. It was glossy, high production value, kind of had that Bollywood feel, and it had an international cast from India and Pakistan. But the thing that made it so controversial was that it dared to tell a deeply taboo story, a romance, during the war between a Bengali woman and a Pakistani soldier. It was so controversial, its theatrical run got cut short. And this contrast just lays it all out, doesn't it? Back in '72, filmmaking was part of a nation-building project. It was state-funded, raw, and focused inward. By 2011, it was driven by private money with global ambitions and this sleek commercial look. One was about creating a national story. The other was about complicating that story for the whole world. But maybe one of the most dramatic changes between these two films is the depiction of religion. Seriously, it's a story of how a visual symbol of faith went from being the mark of a villain to the mark of a hero. See, in Ore Agaro Jan, the story needed clear-cut heroes and villains. And the villains weren't just the Pakistani soldiers, but also the local Bengali collaborators. So the film uses this really blunt but effective shorthand. Visible signs of Muslim piety, like prayer caps, basically become visual code for "this guy's a traitor." And this one line of dialogue from a villain, it reveals everything. He's disgusted that other Muslims would choose a Bengali identity, shouting victory to Bengali, over their shared religious identity with Pakistan. Right after the war, the new nation was trying to define itself as secular and Bengali, the exact opposite of the religious basis for Pakistan. So being visibly pious was suspicious. Now, fast forward to Meherjan, and that pendulum has swung all the way to the other side. Over those 40 years, a more assertive, global Islamic identity had become really central for a lot of Bangladeshis, and the film reflects that shift. Its moral compass isn't a secular freedom fighter, it's a devout, wise, elderly patriarch. But here's the crucial part. This character is complex. He's deeply religious, but he completely separates his personal faith from the political project of Pakistan. He represents this sophisticated, pluralistic idea of Bengali Islam that existed long before partition. It's a kind of nuance that would have been absolutely unthinkable on screen back in 1972. No way. And we see an equally powerful shift when we look at the portrayal of women. The war involved horrific, widespread sexual violence, and how each of these films deals with its female survivors, well, it tells you everything you need to know about the changing social landscape. At the heart of all this is the term Birangana. It means brave woman, and it was an honor given by the new government to recognize women who had endured sexual violence. The idea was to reframe them, not as shamed victims, but as war heroes. But how that honor was actually shown on screen, well, that changed dramatically. And the contrast here is it's night and day. In the 1972 film, the female survivors are tragic figures. They're seen as broken, their stories ending in suicide or quiet death. They're symbols of a violated nation. But in Meherjan, the survivor, Neela, completely rejects that story. She becomes what the source material calls a wild woman. She's defiant and she's confrontational, and in the end, she becomes an armed warrior. This piece of dialogue is just electric. Neela takes her trauma and turns it into a weapon, not just against the enemy army, but against the hypocrisy of her own society. She confronts a Bengali man, exposing his own repressed violence. She absolutely refuses to be a victim and reclaims her body and her power in the most provocative way you can imagine. So let's step back for a second. What does this all add up to? Well, this pendulum swing we're seeing in the cinema perfectly mirrors this bigger, unresolved debate inside Bangladesh itself. That initial post-war identity, super secular, super linguistic, slowly gave way to a new reality where a global Islamic identity also became a powerful force. The films didn't cause this change. They're the looking glass that's reflecting it. So why does any of this matter? Because this shows us that national memory isn't some fixed statue in a park. It's a living story. It's constantly being argued over, reshaped, and retold. What a country chooses to remember and how it chooses to tell that story on screen says everything about what it is right now and what it wants to become. And that brings us to today. With Bangladesh having recently gone through yet another dramatic political shift, the nation's story is once again up in the air. That foundational story of 1971 is still being debated. So the question we're left with is, what kind of heroes, what kind of villains, and what kind of nation will the next generation of filmmakers show us in their own looking glass?